SuperTalk Mississippi Media Production.
CorinthNissan.com, a large selection of vehicles, $20,000 or under. Don't miss their 543 deal. That's $5,000 off Muranos, $4,000 off Altimas, or $3,000 off the Nissan Kicks. CorinthNissan.com.
Today we're glad to have with us a local person, someone that's well known to most of the community, Mr. Ken Powell. As we recognize our veterans of this area who have served their country during time of conflict, and Ken brings us up to one of the more recent issues our country has faced back during Desert Storm and even enduring freedom. And Ken, it's good to have you with us this morning.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Jack. Proud to be here.
Well, you know, I've known you for a long time and actually got to know you during Desert Storm. Even though I wasn't there with you, I was praying for you because I knew that you were in a leadership position, and I was praying for you while you were overseas. But we want to kind of go back and start and establish the fact that you are a hometown boy. You're one of our Brookhaven, Lincoln County individuals, and you were born in Brookhaven, if I'm not correct. Is that right?
Actually, I was born in Prentice, Mississippi,
okay.
But we moved to Brookhaven. Lived at Union Church for a while, moved to Brookhaven when I was about 4 years old, and I lived the rest of my life here.
Okay, so graduated from?
Brookhaven Academy in 1977.
1977. And then what I found interesting, you had the opportunity, which is a special opportunity for those who are able to. You were able to make application and was accepted to West Point, the military academy.
I was fortunate to get an appointment out of high school to the military academy, and I spent my 4 years there and graduated in 1981, at which time I was commissioned into the Army.
Now, we probably could spend a good bit of time talking about your experiences at West Point, because from what I've read about those 4 years, they're very intense. And they are and you know, I guess in reality, they do weed out those who may not be officer material and have leadership skills. But it is very intense, that first year being a plebe and all of the things that come with that. But as much as I'd like to spend some time, we're not going to have anything stands out about those 4 years. Was it as intense as I've read?
It's one of those $1 million experiences. I wouldn't take $1 million far. You couldn't give me $1 million to go through it again. Yeah.
Well, it is an honor to have you with us and to be a graduate of the West Point Military Academy, which has been around for a long time and turned out some incredible leaders. But you got out of West Point, you got your commission, I believe second lieutenant.
Correct.
And then you spent some time in the Army. Spent
about 5.5 years on active duty. I had a 5-year commitment. Active duty commitment to begin with. I spent about 5.5 years and came back December of '87. I came back to Brookhaven and joined my father at R.B. Wall Oil Company.
Right. Now, your training after graduation from the academy, where did they end up assigning you?
I ended up going to Fort Riley as an ammunition officer. Later, I became a special weapons officer, and I was assigned to a unit in Germany. Basically had to make a career decision. I decided to go ahead and resign and come back to Brookhaven as opposed to going to Germany with the new assignment. But I spent time at Fort Riley and time at Huntsville, Alabama at Redstone Arsenal.
Okay, so you did come back. You decided to resign your commission and stay in the reserves, and you came back to Mississippi, and you were stationed. You were with a group here in Brookhaven?
I stayed in the reserves. Yes, I was in a unit in Jackson, Mississippi for a short time, an ammunition unit up there, 40th Ordnance Group. And then I was fortunate to be selected to command the 296 Transportation Company here in Brookhaven, which happened to be a fuel transportation company.
Which that particular unit touches a lot of lives because it is a local unit, and almost all, not all, but a good percentage, maybe the majority of the men in that group with you are from this area.
Had a lot of folks from Lincoln County. Had some from down in Pike County. Had them as far away as Laurel and Jackson. I actually had a few that came from Alabama to be part of the unit. And
people don't realize how essential the reserves are to our country because a lot of times, because the government doesn't keep a huge military force, it's when something happens, that's what the reserves are for.
Desert Shield, Desert Storm was the first time since World War II that we'd seen an extensive mobilization of the reserves, National Guard. It became apparent that they were an integral part of the overall service, the overall military capability of our armed forces. And, of course, that's been even more apparent and evident with Iraqi freedom and, of course, the war in Afghanistan.
And not to take anything away from the regular Army, but I'm telling you, the reserves are just as sharp as the regular guys. They may not be full-time uniform, but they're the demands that are placed on them, the efficiency of the training. The reserve units are an integral part of the whole overall military presence our country has.
Absolutely. There's no question. We could not go to war today without the reserve forces. And, of course, I'm talking about the Army Reserve and the National Guard. It could not go to war without them.
Exactly. Well, you're back in Brookhaven. You've got a great position right here. You've got the company in your hometown, and everything's going right along. And then we start to have issues in the Middle East, and Desert Shield turns into Desert Storm. And you were actually called up during Desert Shield, am I correct? Or?
Yeah, we had just been on an exercise that summer that simulated an event in the Middle East involving Iraq, and it was eerily similar to what reality ended up being just a few months later.
Think somebody knew something already, and they were kind of prepping y'all?
It's obvious that the intel guys had some ideas, right. What was afoot. And, of course, that August, I think, is when the invasion, the Iraqi forces invaded Kuwait. We came back from AT about that time, because I remember having several meetings with my soldiers and my key leadership about, hey, guys, this is what we've been training for. This is the scenario that we've studied and rehearsed. Don't think we're not going to be part of this, because we most likely are. And sure enough, in September we got our initial alert order. In October we got the green light. And in November we hit country.
So you went to where did you actually go into? Was it Saudi Arabia?
We went into Saudi Arabia initially. Most all the forces were staging in Saudi Arabia, a very strong ally of ours in that region. They, of course, were very concerned about what Saddam Hussein's intentions may be. He had already taken the oil fields in Kuwait. There was some fear that he was going to push into northern Saudi Arabia and perhaps even further. Mm-hmm. So they were very willing hosts to our forces, and that's where all the staging took place prior to the actual beginning of the offensive.
Well, let's talk about something that's interesting, and you and I alluded to this just a moment ago, right before we started recording. You were being a graduate of the West Point Military Academy. You were in leadership. You were expected to be a leader, and your rank, put you as a company commander, and you were responsible for that group of men. But you're also responsible to commanders above you that gave you assignments, and there's a fine balance, and it goes back to a couple of movies that I remember over the years. One was 12 O'Clock High with Gregory Peck. Another one was Command Decision with Clark Gable. And they were both about men in leadership positions, commanders of groups, large groups of men, making the kind of decisions that affect not only accomplishing their mission, but also the lives of a lot of men. That has to be something that I know you had some of the finest training in the world, but it had to be something that was really took up a lot of your thought process.
Oh, no question about it. It's a very humbling experience. Of course, we do train for that. We study that. We understand what the issues are. I think I mentioned to you earlier that one of our little cliches was, mission first, soldiers always. You've got a mission, you've got to accomplish that mission. There's no, ifs, ands, or buts about that. But you also have to take care of your soldiers and be mindful of how that mission impacts them and the potential hazards and so forth and risks that are involved. And, it's very difficult at times. I mean, you receive a mission from higher command, and you have some latitude usually for input. To try and make sure that you have the resources and your folks are properly trained and equipped, so forth and so on. But in the end, it's your mission, and you have to accomplish it, and you have to do it with the soldiers and resources available. And yes, sometimes it means asking people to do things that obviously they would rather not do. And you just have to, you have to rely on your subordinates. You have to rely on your training. And in my particular case, I relied on a lot of prayer. I can assure you. You mentioned praying for us earlier, and I used to tell everybody that was the strongest weapon we had, as far as I was concerned, was the prayers that went up on our behalf. Because I'm very serious about that. I found myself relying on my faith more so than ever before in trying to execute the missions that I'd been given.
I can't imagine going into any kind of conflict, either as a person on the front line confronting the enemy face to face, or even a position such as yours where you were leading those men, but yet at the same time making decisions that affected hundreds of men. I don't know how you do it without a lot of prayer, without your faith being the source of your strength.
Let me tell you a quick story. I came home after the war. I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but let me tell you this story. I came home. I had the opportunity to speak at some clubs, organizations, and at one club, I testified to my Christian faith and how important that was for me during the course of our deployment. And somebody asked me, said, General Schwarzkopf, have you ever heard him mention whether he was a Christian or not? I said, I really haven't. I don't know where he stands in that regard, but I couldn't imagine, given my level of responsibility, which was minor compared to his level of responsibility, and knowing how I had to rely on my Christian faith, I couldn't imagine being in his position and being as successful as he was in that position without having a strong Christian faith. A few months later, I happened to see an interview with General Schwarzkopf, and they were talking about this and that and the other. And I remember at some point they got talking about reading material that he may have had, that he studied, et cetera, while he was deployed. And he said by his bedside every night there were 2 books. And I think one was Clausewitz on War, I think was one of them, some book about the military art and the history of the military art and so forth. And the other was the Bible. And he made the comment, I can assure you my Bible was the better read. And so immediately I checked the block. I said, okay, I figured as much.
That's exactly right.
It almost had to happen.
Well, that's incredible because, a lot of people think that, if I'm going to be in the military, I want to be an officer. I want to be way back behind everybody. I don't want to be out there where anybody's shooting at me or dropping bombs on me. And they don't think about the difficulty of the position that you're in. Not only yourself, and I'm not talking about you, Ken, but I'm talking about any person who leads men into any kind of conflict. It's something where without faith, I don't know how you do it. All right, we're Desert Storm is about to crank up here, and I still remember that night when we got the word in the States that the invasion had actually started and the troops were moving across. Your role and your company, I thought, was really interesting and what all they had to do during that time. Give us a little brief synopsis of what all was taking place with Ken Powell and the guys from right here in our hometown.
We were a fuel transport company. We had 65,000 gallon tankers with 5-ton tractors pulling those tankers, and we were responsible for supplying fuel to the force. Modern armies use a lot of resources, and they use no other resource, no greater resource than fuel. I mean, you just absolutely have to have fuel. And so prior to the beginning of the war, we were involved in moving forward fuel forward to various operating bases that were at the line of departure, where the forces were actually going to kick off the offensive, as well as supporting ongoing operations all over the theater. So we were just pushing thousands and thousands of gallons of fuel every day, ongoing missions, 24/7, getting ready for the push forward. Once the offensive began, of course, those forces rapidly depleted the fuel that had been pre-positioned forward, and then we were involved in pushing fuel into Kuwait and into parts of Iraq, actually, southern Iraq, to support the ongoing offensive.
Well, we're going to take a short break. We're honored to have with us today. I guess I can say retired now. It's hard to say you're retired, Ken.
Didn't think I'd be that old, but I am.
Retired Colonel Ken Powell, a local boy who's consented to come in and visit with us today, one of our honored veterans, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
You know that nowadays, most people go online to look at a business before they spend their money. What if the online information about your business is incorrect, or even worse, not very flattering? If your online presence isn't great, you may be losing customers. STMM Digital's trusted and highly trained team is the answer. We're ready to work with you to help your business capitalize on the power of digital marketing. Call 601-991-2305 or go to stmmdigital.com to get started today.
Today, we're glad to honored to have with us, Mr. Ken Powell, retired Colonel, United States Army, who was company commander here in Brookhaven of the Reserve Unit, and has consented to come in and share with us his experiences. A graduate of the West Point Military Academy, a veteran of Desert Storm, and actually, Ken, I believe you were involved in Enduring Freedom operation as well.
Correct. I had at that time moved to the 3rd Personnel Command in Jackson, Mississippi. I was the operations officer for the command. It was a general level command, and ultimately it became the personnel command for the theater of operations. We were the Enduring Theater Personnel Command, and so I had the opportunity to deploy with them during that operation.
Well, okay. Now, let's just for a second talk a little bit about, I had a brother involved in Desert Storm and Enduring Freedom. What was it like for you guys? I know being tankers driving trucks filled with fuel all across the desert was probably a hazardous task, for no doubt. But what was the living conditions like? I guess you were in a tent most of the time, and you were on the move most of the time. And tell us a little bit about and kind of blend both Desert Storm and Enduring Freedom.
Well, obviously, Desert Storm was an off-the-cuff, on-the-run type deployment. And there was really no facilities to house or to support us whatsoever at the beginning of the mobilization. So, yeah, we moved into whatever kind of temporary arrangements we could find. Mostly we lived in tents. We had 30-man tents that we lived in, and we had smaller 8-man tents that some of your officers and NCOs would live in, a little bit separate, get a little separation from the men that you were actually in charge of. We did at one point live at a place we called the Farm, which was a farmhouse that the U.S. Army had gone out and procured in some shape, form, or fashion. And they brought they looked like tool sheds is what they looked like, but they brought them in, put them together, and called them barracks. So we moved into those for a little while, lived like that. We eventually ended up living at Al Jabal, living on a Marine compound. And the senior master gunny in the logistics section of that expeditionary force was Master Gunny Sergeant Bowie. I cannot think of his first name now, but he was one of our own Bowies from Lincoln County here. One of my soldiers, Sergeant Charlie Sanders' brother-in-law, was in that organization.
Wow.
We got all new tents, got all new heaters for all our tents, got pressure washers for all our vehicles. We lived pretty fat at Al Jabal.
It's good
and
to know
because
somebody,
of Master Gunnery Bowie and Charlie Sanders' brother-in-law.
Oh, thank you, Lord, for that Lincoln County connection.
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, we were living there, and we were kind of split up because we had people all over the place. I had people in Bahrain supporting the Air Force over there. I had folks up at a little place called Al Masab that was, we were continuing to push fuel forward from there. I actually was at Al Masab the night the offensive started. And that was quite a light show, you can imagine, because the B-52s came in and, we were still probably 40 miles away and the ground was rumbling and it sounded like just continuous thunder. And I could only think of, what kind of devastation was being brought to bear there at the, at the point of impact. It didn't surprise me at all that the Iraqi soldiers gave up en masse because we just overwhelmed them with our firepower. I think they never had any idea that we could bring such to battle.
No idea. But
we had folks scattered all over, and we lived in anything from tents to these temporary barracks to, like I said, Al Jabal. We were in brand new tents and living pretty fat there. And in Iraq, there was a little more infrastructure because we went into Kuwait initially, and they were actually building a base there called Erfjan, which was being built with the intention of housing on a permanent basis an Army brigade. It was going to be I don't know exactly what the arrangements were going to be, but I suppose it was going to be a rotating brigade, one brigade come in for a tour and then another on top of it. So there were some facilities there in place for us. We initially lived in tents, but they were nice tents. I mean, they had them set up, air conditioned, the whole 9 yards, and then later we moved into hardstand billets. Now, that was in Kuwait. Once the war began and we moved into Iraq, that was a whole other story. I had the honor of being selected to lead our advanced party into Baghdad. And we moved in the week after Baghdad was initially under our control. Moved in on top of Baghdad International Airport, as a matter of fact, while it was still a combat objective. And we just lived wherever we could. I mean, we slept on the side of the road. We finally procured a burned-out building that we called the Crack House because it looked like a crack house. That's what it looked like. And that's where we lived the rest of the time that we were deployed to Iraq. And of course, it built up over time, and they ended up putting in. We were living off MREs and whatnot, boodle boxes from home, whatever we could get for the first month or so. And then later we put up our own field mess tent, and then later they had a consolidated field mess tent. So conditions improved as it went along.
Tell me just briefly, tell us a little bit about the reception you received from the Iraqi people. Probably was different, or was it similar? If you can contrast Desert Storm and Enduring Freedom.
Okay, and that's a good contrast to draw there. In Kuwait, we had a very westernized nation, a very pro-Western nation that had been invaded and brutalized by its neighbor, Iraq. We moved in and were absolutely seen as the liberators. we were seen as the good guys. One of my fondest memories is rolling in. We were part. Again, I was fortunate to lead a convoy into Kuwait as part of the first supply convoy into the city after liberation. It was the morning after liberation. We were part of the first supply convoy in there, and we rolled in, and there was a lot of jubilation. Some of the greatest pictures I have of that whole experience is, the people, waving the flag and chanting USA, and they were all wanting to have pictures taken with us, and just, all this kind of stuff. And it really made you feel like you had done a good thing. And there was no question that we were on the side of right, no question about it. In Iraq, it was a mixed bag. Because we were the invaders.
Sure.
Shape it any way you want to. We were the invaders, and some of them received us very warmly. You could tell that they were, very thankful that the Saddam regime had been brought to an end. They were hopeful for a better future. Some of them were very resentful. There was no doubt there was animosity and antagonism there. And, of course, it manifested itself later on with the insurgency and all the issues that we've had to deal with there. I think overall, I got the feeling overall that the majority of the middle-class, well-educated Iraqis were glad to see the Saddam regime brought to an end. They were still dubious about our presence there. Sure. And they just had a certain reservation about foreigners on their soil. Mm-hmm. But I think overall, in the end, it was a warm embrace, certainly a friendly embrace, and hopefully we have left a better place than what we found.
What about enduring freedom?
Well, now that I was talking about
the
initial what I was talking about going into Kuwait and kicking them out of Kuwait. We were the liberators, no doubt. When we moved into Iraq to throw Saddam out of power.
That's right.
Again, a mixed bag. But in the end, I think the handoff was a one between friends, and hopefully we have an ally there now.
Hopefully we do.
Yeah.
Ken, absolutely interesting stuff that you're sharing with us today. One of the things that when you and I were talking about setting this time up was the relationship between any man who leads and the men who follow. And I'm probably accurate in saying you can't always count on that being a good relationship, but I think it's in cases such as yours, there's a special bond between the officer who's making the decisions and leading and the men who are carrying out the task. Really, when it gets right down to it, the ones who are doing the job.
Absolutely.
Okay, so special relationships that endure even stronger today that came out of those experiences, I'm sure.
Any success any leader has in any capacity is based on the subordinates that they have working for them. In a military organization, especially one that has been tasked to go to war and has had to conduct, execute, and hopefully successfully fulfill combat missions, any leader knows that he's absolutely dependent upon his subordinate leaders and the soldiers, the men and women assigned under them, to make it happen. And I'm certainly conscious of that. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. I had my biggest fear would have been to let my men, and I say men generically there because I had men and women assigned,
right,
to let my soldiers down and to fail in the mission. That was probably the biggest burden I carried. I had some outstanding troops who, despite my inadequacies, were able to complete every mission with a high degree of success. At the time that we did the last accounting, we had moved more gallons than any other fuel truck company in the theater. We had traveled several 100,000 miles without a single fatal accident. We had several accidents and we had several incidents, but none fatal. And in the end, we accomplished our mission and we brought everybody home safely. And it was a tribute to the men and women that were working for me. I could start naming names in a hurry, and I don't want to do that because I leave so many out. I'd leave so many out. But there are guys right here in Brookhaven, Mississippi, that they could call me at 3 a.m. Tomorrow morning, and I would show up with whatever they needed and do whatever I had to help them in any way possible, because I know that that my success was dependent upon them being willing to do the things I asked them to do. And my retiring as a full colonel was a testament not to anything I did, because I was kind of a dummy. I was generally the dumbest one in the room. I can assure you that. I do not say that flippantly. I mean, I'd sit there and throw it out there, and my soldiers would get to digging around and come up with solutions. I was like, yeah, right.
That's it. That's it.
I think that'll work. And it would. And if I dared start dictating, usually, we'd end up fumbling the ball and have to back up and say, okay, guys, what now? And I mean all that very sincerely. But I will tell you that, some of the greatest compliments I've ever had came from different soldiers that I've seen in the years subsequent. And they'd walk up and say, hey, sir, do you remember me? And in most cases I would. A couple of cases I didn't, because they would be 18, 19-year-old kids when I saw them last. And now they're 35, 38-year-old men. And anyway, at some point they would say, well, sir, I'm just glad I was over there with you. Wow. If you don't think that doesn't humble you, if you don't think that doesn't touch you.
Absolutely.
Because I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I was the most bogus guy in the world. But I was trying to do the right thing.
But it's still a testimony of their confidence in you. And it may have been because of your style of leadership. And there's multitudes of styles of leadership. But I can remember my brother even saying, when men would say they wanted to fly with him, it's the same thing you're talking about. They wanted to be in his group or his squadron or his command.
Yeah. No one could ever give me a higher compliment.
That is the highest praise for an officer or a commander of any kind of a group of military personnel.
Oh, and for any of those that are out there that are saying, well, by golly, I wish I hadn't been out over there with you. I got you. I hear you too.
It's just like I've heard so many times and read in so many books, the highest accomplishment was to perform your mission, to accomplish your mission at the highest level of excellence and performance, and bring your men home. It's unfortunate that great leaders can't all say that just because of the task that they're given. But in your case, Ken, I think God had his hand on you, prepared you, and put you in that position so that you could lead these men at that time. There's no coincidences in all these things. You're being there when they needed a company commander, and being able for God to use you and take you over there and safely bring all your crew back and all your men back. That's a pretty incredible thing. And really, I'm so grateful to have you with us to come in and share your experiences. And, we could probably talk another half a day. You
made a comment just then about, how God's hand is on all these things. Believe me, I've made this comment many, many times. The one thing about my military career that I can look back on and just, offer testimony after testimony on was that God always surrounded me with the right people at the right time. He always put together the team that I was fortunate and honored to be a part of. And it was because his hand was on that. And it was because he put that team together. And it was because of those people that were part of that team that I'm here today and able to look back and say, we did have some success, and we did bring everybody home. But I've made that very comment. God's hand was always moving. He always put together the team. I was always blessed by being surrounded by great people, and it was by God's hand. I can sit here and give you the details of how.
Right.
At the last minute, this one moved from here to there and whatnot. They ended up in my unit, and they ended up being, one of the stalwarts that I leaned on.
Needed.
And just what I needed, exactly. And, God's hand was a move.
Moving. It's obvious that it was a successful mission. And, we really, as Christians and in the Bible Belt of America, we really need to be praying that God will continue to put men in positions of leadership who will look to that source that you had. And Schwarzkopf alluded to.
I had a chance to speak out at Enterprise at Veterans Day. They had a wonderful program out there, and I just really want to give a shout out to all the people. And again, I don't want to start calling names. I'll leave somebody out and hurt some feelings, but they did a wonderful program, as do a lot of the schools in the area. And I had a chance to speak, and one of the things I made a comment was to the effect that one of the greatest blessings America has had through the years is that God has always blessed us with men and women that were willing, when the bell rang, they were willing to stand up, take their place, do their duty for God and country. And I just pray that we're always blessed with such men and women, because that's been the greatest treasure this country's ever had, is that we've had men and women. When called, they answered the call. And I hope that he continues to bless us in that way.
We need men of your caliber and those others and the men that made up your company. And we're just grateful for your service. And it's been an honor for me to sit here and share with you, Ken, and as you've shared your experiences during Desert Storm and Enduring Freedom and your service to your country and wearing that very special uniform. And we're just grateful as a country. And let me just say to you, as it's been said before, on behalf of America, on behalf of the citizens of our great country, we are grateful for your service, as well as the service of your men who responded when the bell rang.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank y'all for what y'all are doing here at SuperTalk. I think this is great. We need to capture the history that some of these people can provide, because, a lot of our World War II vets, they're going by the wayside. We're losing them rapidly, and I just appreciate what y'all are doing. It's a great thing.
Well, it's all a part of our recognition of the 10th anniversary of the Military Memorial Museum here in Brookhaven to honor and recognize and not glorify war, but to honor and recognize men just like Ken Powell, and the countless others from Brookhaven and Lincoln County that just put on the uniform when there was a need. And again, thank you, Ken, for coming in and sharing with us this morning.
Well, thanks for having me.
A SuperTalk Mississippi Media production.